The heavy iron gate groaned, a dry, metallic sound, as it slowly swung open to reveal the bleak, late-winter sky of the northeast. I stepped out, and the biting wind immediately assaulted me, seeping through the thin, tattered fabric of my prison-issued coat, making me shudder. 6 years. A stretch of time long enough to transform a vibrant woman in her 20s into a hollow shell, a ghost wandering among the living. I took a deep breath, but I didn't feel the freedom or relief people always talked about. My chest only felt heavy, filled with the damp, desolate scent of prison walls. The person waiting for me beside a sleek, black luxury sedan was not Arthur. Not the husband who had once sworn eternal love before personally sending me here. Instead, it was Leo, his most trusted assistant, the young man whose face always held a look of pained sympathy whenever he saw me, hastily stubbed out his cigarette and walked quickly toward me. He started to reach for my dilapidated duffel bag, then hesitated and pulled his hand back. Leo bowed his head slightly, his voice trembling with a forced reverence. "Miss Eliza, Mr. Blackwood had an unexpected board meeting and couldn't make it. He asked me to take you to your new place." I didn't answer, didn't even bother to smirk at the timeless excuse of a meeting. I just gave a silent nod and slid into the back seat. The car's interior was warm and smelled of expensive cologne, a fragrance so foreign it made my stomach turn. Throughout the drive, Leo kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes a mixture of pity and curiosity, but I just turned my face to the window. New York City had changed so much. Skyscrapers crowded the skyline like a dense forest. The streets were choked with traffic. Everything was glossy and alien, making me feel like a relic forgotten by time. The car stopped in front of a luxury high-rise on the Hudson River, a slice of prime real estate reserved for the city's elite. Leo quickly got out to open my door, leading me through the opulent lobby to the elevator. I kept my head down, trying to shrink into my oversized, outdated clothes to avoid the probing stares of the doormen and residents. When the door to the penthouse on the 25th floor opened, I was met with a vast, open space filled with lavish furniture and state-of-the-art appliances, from the imported Italian leather sofa to the massive curved screen television. Leo set down my bag and pulled a thick envelope and a gleaming set of keys from his suit pocket. He placed them on the glass coffee table, his voice faltering. "This is a black card with no spending limit and the keys to this apartment." Mr. Blackwood said, "This is a small gesture to make up for things." He said that, in hindsight, the sentence was overly harsh. "He wants you to have a comfortable life now that you're out." I stared at the keys lying on the glass table. The metal glinted under the crystal chandelier, stinging my eyes. Make up for things? Was he using money to buy a clear conscience? Using this apartment to silence someone fresh out of prison like me? I picked up the keys, the cold metal seeping into my bony palm. I didn't scream. I didn't hurl them back in Leo's face as a wronged wife might. I just lifted my head, my deep, hollow eyes meeting his. Leo flinched and took a step back, startled by my gaze. It was the look of an animal wounded beyond repair, no longer angry, only dead inside. My dry, cracked lips parted, and I spoke, each word slow, raspy, but perfectly clear. "Take these back to Arthur. Tell him Eliza died in prison. The dead have no need for a home." Leo's face went pale. He opened his mouth to say something, but his throat seemed to clench, strangling the words. I didn't wait for his reaction. I quietly picked up my tattered duffel bag, turned, and walked out the door, leaving him standing stunned in the middle of the luxurious apartment. As the elevator doors closed, I could see he was still frozen in place, utterly bewildered. I walked to the riverbank. The winter water was a sheet of gray, small waves lapping against the stone embankment. The wind whipped at me, but I no longer felt the cold. My heart had frozen over long ago. I opened my hand, looked at the keys and the black card one last time, then flung them with all my might into the dark water. They made a small, hollow splash and vanished. Just like my life, just like my hope, all of it had sunk to the bottomless depths. I turned and walked away, melting into the hurried crowds, becoming another anonymous ghost in this glittering city. I learned later that at the exact moment I threw those keys into the river, Arthur was sitting in his executive office on the top floor of his real estate empire, waiting. He sat in his powerful leather chair, a half-smoked cigarette between his fingers, his eyes fixed on the phone on his desk. In his arrogant mind, he probably believed I would call, either to thank him profusely for his expensive gift or to scream curses to vent the fury built up over 6 long years. Either reaction would prove I still had feelings, that I was still human, and most importantly, that I was still under his control. But the only response to his waiting was a chilling silence. The phone remained as lifeless as a brick. The office door burst open. Leo entered, his face ashen, cold sweat beading on his forehead despite the warm air circulating in the room. Arthur frowned, crushing his cigarette in the ashtray. His deep voice resonated with authority. "Where is she? Did she take the keys? Why hasn't she called me?" Leo swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he recounted my words, not daring to omit a single one. She didn't accept them. She told me to tell you that Eliza died in prison. The dead have no need for a home." Arthur froze, the pen in his hand stopping midair. A flicker of disbelief and anger crossed his handsome face. He shot up from his chair, the cigarette falling from his hand and scorching a spot on the expensive Persian rug, unnoticed. "She dared to say that? Where did she go?" Arthur roared, the volume making Leo jump. Leo looked at the floor, mumbling. "She threw everything into the Hudson River and left. I couldn't keep up with her. It was like she just vanished." Arthur slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing through the vast office. He couldn't believe that the woman who had once loved him enough to sacrifice her youth, who had knelt and begged him to trust her, could now be so cold, so final. His pride, the pride of a successful man, was wounded. He immediately ordered his men to find me, but I was like a grain of sand washed away in a boundless ocean, leaving no trace. My disappearance became a thorn in his side, planting a seed of unease he couldn't name. He began to have his people investigate what had really happened to me during my final 2 years in the correctional facility, the period when his visitation rights had been revoked and he had lost all contact. A few days later, a thick medical file was placed on his desk. The cold, clinical words inside were like knives twisting in his gut. Arthur's hands trembled as he turned the pages. He had always thought my suicide attempt 2 years prior, slitting my wrists, was an act of a weak, love-sick woman trying to win his pity. But the naked truth laid bare in the file was 1,000 times more brutal than he could have ever imagined. It turned out I hadn't wanted to die over him. I had been cornered and beaten by a gang of inmates in the showers. They not only brutalized me, but also stole the only thing I had left of my grandmother, an old silver locket I cherished more than my own life. In that moment of utter desperation, cornered and robbed of my last shred of hope, I had snapped. I had launched myself at them like a wild animal, sinking my teeth into the leader's ear and tearing a bloody piece of it off. That horrific fight landed me in solitary confinement for a month. No light, no human contact, just suffocating darkness and loneliness. It was during that hellish time that my spirit completely shattered. I descended into a severe depression, developed crippling post-traumatic stress disorder, and gradually lost my ability to speak. Arthur dropped the file. He sank into his chair, his eyes staring blankly into space. For the first time in 6 years, a genuine fear crept into his very cells. He realized that the wife he had once considered weak and submissive had truly died on that fateful night. What had returned was just an empty vessel, carrying psychological wounds that could never heal. And the architect of this tragedy was none other than himself, the man who had callously thrown me to the wolves, all because he believed the lies of his mistress. Arthur buried his head in his hands. In the cold, luxurious office, his ragged breaths sounded like a lament for a love he had personally crushed to dust. 6 months passed since I'd thrown the keys into that cold river. My life had become like a dry leaf, blown by the wind into the darkest corners of the city. I didn't dare use my real name or take any job that required an ID. The fear that Arthur would find me was a constant, haunting shadow. I lived in a grimy, run-down tenement building, collecting cans and bottles by day and taking whatever under-the-table cleaning jobs I could find at night, construction sites, office buildings, anything to earn enough for instant noodles to survive another day. Today, I'd found work cleaning a new skyscraper that had just finished its structural phase. The developer was supposedly coming for an inspection, so the foreman had us scrubbing the main lobby until it gleamed. I pulled on a loose, paint-splattered jumpsuit and a wide-brimmed hat that covered half of my gaunt face and my hair, which I'd chopped short like a man's. Holding a high-pressure water hose, I kept my head down, meticulously blasting away every speck of dried mud and grime from the concrete floor. The loud hum of the pump helped drown out the hunger gnawing at my insides. As I was working, the sharp clack of expensive leather shoes on the floor grew louder, accompanied by the murmur of a surrounding entourage. I instinctively moved aside, my head still lowered, planning to wait for them to pass. But the polished dress shoes stopped directly in front of my water hose, blocking my path. I glanced up, my eyes meeting a pair of impeccably tailored trousers that screamed wealth and power, the kind people like me only ever saw from a great distance. "Hey, you! Get out of the way for the boss," a site manager yelled. Before I could move, a deep, masculine voice, a voice so familiar it made my heart stop, rang out. "Wait!" The man took a step forward and crouched down, trying to peer under the brim of my hat at my grimy face. I froze, my whole body trembling. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt cemented to the wet floor. It was Arthur. Still handsome, still exuding the polished arrogance of a powerful CEO, but the look in his eyes as he stared at me was one of utter shock and disbelief. He whispered, his voice cracking with emotion, "Eliza, is that you?" I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood, desperately trying to swallow the sob rising in my throat. I shook my head frantically, trying to back away, but Arthur was faster. He lunged forward and grabbed my wrist, bony and frail, just skin and bone. His hand was warm, but to me, it felt like a searing iron clamp, bringing back agonizing memories of being restrained, of being interrogated in prison. "You've hidden yourself well," Arthur cried out, his voice lost in the howl of the wind whipping through the unfinished building. "Look at you. Look at what you've become. Do you even look human? Why has it come to this?" His touch, his breath, it was all a spark to the powder keg of trauma I had suppressed for so long. Overwhelming fear suddenly erupted into the ferocious resistance of a cornered animal. I didn't say a word, didn't explain, didn't beg. I tried to yank my arm free, but his grip was too strong. In a blind panic, I aimed the high-pressure hose in my hand directly at him. Swoosh! A powerful jet of icy water slammed into his expensive suit, his handsome face, his towering pride. The people around us gasped. A few security guards started to rush forward, but Arthur held up a hand to stop them. He just stood there, taking the full force of the blast, letting the merciless stream of water soak him from head to toe. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot, never flinching, as if he wanted to use this physical pain to atone for the guilt tearing him apart. I stared back, my finger still clamped on the trigger, as my tears mixed with the dirty water streaming down my face, tasting of salt and bitterness. Ignoring his drenched, pathetic state, Arthur slicked his wet hair back, revealing a resolute forehead now etched with lines of exhaustion. He signaled to the stunned guards. His voice was cold and commanding again, but his eyes, fixed on me, were heavy with an indescribable sorrow. "Take her to the car. We're going back to the office." I struggled, tried to scream for help, but what was the strength of a frail, sick woman against two large bodyguards? They dragged me away like a sack of trash and shoved me into the waiting luxury car. Trapped in the confined space, the smell of leather mingling with the musty odor clinging to me, I shrank into the corner of the seat. Back at his office, Arthur didn't change his wet clothes. He threw me a clean towel and sat down across from me. Water dripped from his suit onto the polished floor, but he didn't seem to care. He studied me, his gaze a mix of scrutiny and helplessness, then pushed a thick file across the desk. I glanced at the cover. Development plans for a luxury eco-resort, accompanied by a map of a familiar plot of land on the city's outskirts. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was the public cemetery in my old town, the place where my grandmother was buried. I looked up at Arthur, my eyes filled with fear and suspicion. He slowly opened the file and pointed to a red dot on the map. His voice was low, but each word hammered into me like a nail. "This is your grandmother's grave, isn't it? This land is right in the center of the group's new resort project. According to the development plan, this entire cemetery has to be relocated. I trembled, my hands clenching the hem of my ragged shirt. My grandmother was my only family, my reason for living, my entire world. When she died, I was in prison, unable to even attend her funeral. It was the greatest pain of my life. And now, even her final resting place was to be disturbed? My voice was a raw, pained whisper. "What do you want? What do you want from me?" Arthur leaned back, his eyes turning sharp and cold. The flicker of sympathy from before was gone, replaced by the calculating look of a ruthless businessman. "I know you hate me. You won't take my money. But what about your grandmother? If you don't agree, I'll follow standard procedure. Relocate the remains to an unmarked mass cremation site. By then, you'll never be able to find her ashes." I froze. A mass cremation site? My grandmother, who had toiled her entire life, would be subjected to such a lonely, anonymous end? Arthur knew my greatest weakness. He knew I could endure any humiliation, any beating, but I couldn't bear the thought of my grandmother's grave being desecrated. He was cruel, so cruel it sent a chill down my spine. He pushed another paper toward me. It was an employment contract. "Sign this. Work for me for 5 years as a records clerk. Consider it you working off the debt for my past support and your medical bills. In return, I'll leave your grandmother's grave untouched. I'll even have a proper memorial built for her. In 5 years, when the contract ends, you can go wherever you want. I won't stop you." I picked up the pen, my hand shaking violently. 5 years. Not as long as the 6 years I'd lost in prison, but it was a new kind of spiritual imprisonment. I looked at Arthur, the man I had once loved with all my heart, now so alien and terrifying. But the image of my grandmother's simple, grass-covered grave filled my mind, urging me, forcing me to yield. I clenched my teeth and signed my name. It felt like I was selling my soul to the devil for a second time, not for money, but for the peace of the dead. Arthur took the contract, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips, but deep in his eyes I saw a flash of repressed pain. "Good," he said. "Starting tomorrow, you'll move into my mansion. Don't overthink it. It's just more convenient for work." Arthur's mansion was an isolated estate on a small, wooded hill, surrounded by dense, ancient trees that gave it a somber, chilling atmosphere. Leo drove me there at dusk, as the blood-red sunset was being devoured by the approaching night. The heavy iron gates opened, and I stepped into the vast but empty grounds, feeling as if I were entering a more luxurious prison, one without bars, but one that imprisoned you with loneliness. Arthur had already hired an elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, and a live-in private doctor. He seemed to think that material comfort, having every meal served to me, could compensate for the years of starvation and misery I had endured. Mrs. Gable looked at me with pity as she led me to the largest bedroom on the second floor. It had a soft, king-sized bed with white silk sheets, intricately embroidered curtains, and a balcony overlooking a garden bursting with flowers. "Rest well, ma'am. Just call if you need anything," she said before closing the door, leaving me alone in the opulent but alien space. I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the pristine white bed, and goosebumps erupted on my skin. It was too soft, too clean, so clean it reminded me of the fake visitation rooms in prison, set up to deceive inspection committees while we slept crowded together on cold, filthy concrete floors. This comfort was a trap. I was afraid that if I lay down, I would sink into sleep and never wake up, or that I would wake up to find myself strapped to an operating table, my organs being harvested. Night fell, blanketing the mansion in darkness. The silence was so profound that the chirping of crickets outside sounded deafening. I didn't dare turn off the lights, leaving the room glaringly bright. I didn't get on the bed. Instead, I pulled a thin blanket onto the hard wooden floor in the corner, nearest to the door. Only here, with my back against the solid ground, did I feel a fragile sense of security. It felt like those nights huddled in the solitary confinement cell, a place whose memory was so deeply ingrained it had become a perverse comfort. I curled up like a shrimp, my arms wrapped tightly around my head, trying to lull myself to sleep. But the moment I closed my eyes, the horrific nightmares returned. I saw the inmates beating me, saw blood everywhere, saw my grandmother's locket being smashed to pieces. I screamed, but no one heard. I saw Arthur staring at me coldly before turning his back and walking away. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as if it would burst from my chest. I scrambled up, pressing myself into the corner, muttering meaningless sounds as tears streamed down my face. Outside, on his own balcony, Arthur stood silently in the dark, the cherry of his cigarette glowing. He was watching the live feed from the security camera in my room on his tablet. He saw me sleeping on the floor, not the bed. He saw me twitching and thrashing in my sleep. He saw me weeping and begging an invisible tormentor for mercy. With every sob, Arthur's heart constricted with a sharp, agonizing pain. For the first time in his life, this powerful man who could command fortunes felt fear. He was afraid of my brokenness, afraid of the ghost of the past that he himself had helped create, a ghost that was now gnawing away at what little life was left in me. He wanted to run to my room, to hold me, to apologize, but his feet felt like they were cast in lead. He knew his presence right now would only send me deeper into terror. The next morning, Leo drove me to the corporate headquarters to start my new job. I wore the standard office uniform Arthur had provided, a white blouse and a black skirt. On my emaciated frame, they hung like clothes on a scarecrow. As I walked into the grand lobby, I felt dozens of eyes on me. Whispers erupted like a disturbed beehive. I heard the new records clerk used to be a janitor. The CEO just brought her in out of nowhere, probably an old flame he decided to rescue. A woman with heavy makeup whispered to her colleague, loud enough for me to hear, "Look at her face. She looks like an addict. What does the boss even see in her? Or maybe she's got some dirt on him," another woman sneered. I kept my head down, pretending not to hear, and followed Leo into the elevator. I was assigned to the records archive, a room in the sub-basement, rarely visited and reeking of old paper. My job was to sort and file decades-old documents, a tedious, isolating task, just as Arthur had intended, to keep me from interacting with too many people. I worked like a machine, never speaking, never making eye contact. If someone asked me a question, I would just nod or shake my head. Soon, everyone in the company started calling me the mute. I didn't care. My world was now defined by silence. Arthur had instructed the department head not to give me any strenuous tasks, but I didn't want that. I threw myself into the most physically demanding work. Whenever a new shipment of document boxes arrived, instead of waiting for the mail staff, I would haul the heavy cartons myself. I gritted my teeth, straining until the veins stood out on my thin arms, sweat soaking my blouse. With every strained muscle, with every jolt of pain in my spine, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The physical pain helped me forget the mental anguish that was tearing me apart. It made me feel like I was still alive, even if it was just the miserable existence of an insect. One day, Arthur made a surprise visit and found me struggling to lift a box twice my size. He stormed over, furious, snatched the box from my hands, and slammed it on the floor. "What the hell are you doing?" he yelled, his face red with anger. "Did I hire you for manual labor? Why won't you listen to me?" I stood there, panting, my hair stuck to my forehead with sweat. I looked up at him, my expression strangely calm, no fear, no resentment. I pulled a small notepad from my pocket, scribbled a few words, and handed it to him. "I am a debtor. Debtors work to pay their debts. Don't pity me. Your pity makes me sick." Arthur took the note, his hand trembling. He glared at me, his eyes burning as if he wanted to devour me whole, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. He understood. I was using my own self-punishment to punish him. He turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving me alone in the cold archive. I bent down, picked up the box, and continued my silent, relentless work. The days in the basement archive passed in suffocating silence. I thought I would remain an invisible shadow, hidden among the dusty shelves, forever removed from the glamorous, cruel world above. But that fragile peace didn't last long. One rainy afternoon, the archive doors swung open, and the sharp, arrogant click-clack of high heels echoed on the concrete floor. The visitor was Isabel, Arthur's fiancée. I had seen her in society magazines, the darling daughter of a powerful politician, beautiful, elegant, and radiating confidence. She wore a cream-colored designer dress with a fur stole draped over her shoulders. Her strong perfume assaulted my nose, overpowering the familiar musty scent of old paper. She stood there, as radiant as a swan among ugly ducklings, her sharp eyes scanning the shabby room before landing on me. I was sitting on the floor sorting files, my hands stained with ink and dust. I glanced up at her, then immediately looked back down at my work, treating her as if she weren't there. My indifference seemed to infuriate her. She strode closer, the sound of her heels piercing the quiet. She stood over me, her shadow casting me in darkness, her voice sweet but laced with scorn. "I heard Arthur hired a special new employee. So, it's you. Eliza. It's been a long time. You look terrible." I remained silent, my hands moving methodically. Prison had taught me a painful lesson. Silence is the best shield. When you don't react, the bully gets bored. But Isabel was not like the prison thugs. She was more venomous, more arrogant. Seeing I wouldn't respond, she smirked. She was holding a steaming cup of coffee and, with a theatrical slip, upended it. "Oh!" she cried out fakely, as the hot, dark liquid spilled all over my thin arm, seeping into the old, raised scars. The burn was searing, like salt being rubbed into an open wound. I flinched and pulled my arm back but didn't make a sound. I just looked up at her, my eyes empty and lifeless. Isabel dabbed at her hand with a tissue, her voice dripping with contempt. "Oh my, I am so sorry. This floor is so filthy, it made me lose my footing. But I'm sure someone with skin as thick as yours won't even get a blister. People who've been to prison have hides thicker than an elephant's, don't they?" Without a word, I stood up, went to the corner, and got an old rag. I knelt and slowly began wiping the coffee from the floor, my rag deliberately brushing against the toe of her expensive shoe when she refused to move. My submissive, almost defiant, stoicism seemed to stun her. She had expected me to cry, to argue, to show anger, but I treated her like she was nothing, like a speck of dust. My silence became the sharpest weapon, a greater insult to her pride than any curse. Fuming, Isabel stomped her foot, turned on her heel, and stormed out, leaving me alone with the red, blistering burn on my arm. The next day at noon, while everyone else rushed to the cafeteria, I stayed behind in the archive to eat my dry sandwich. But today, Arthur appeared at the door, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the cramped space. His eyes flickered to the burn on my arm, his brow furrowed, but he didn't ask about it. "Come to the cafeteria for lunch," he said curtly. "I don't want people saying I mistreat my employees." I was about to refuse, but his determined expression told me I had no choice. I followed him silently, keeping as much distance as possible. The company cafeteria was loud and chaotic, the smell of food making my stomach clench. Arthur chose a table in a secluded corner. He got me a tray piled high with meat, fish, and a steaming bowl of rich pork and potato stew. "Eat," he said, pushing the tray toward me. It was a command, but there was a hint of pleading in his voice. "You're too thin. Eat something to get your strength back." I looked at the greasy stew, the pieces of pork floating in the broth. The strong smell of meat hit me, awakening the most horrific memories I had tried so hard to bury. In prison, I had been forced by other inmates to eat leftover slop mixed with dish soap and filth from the toilets. They called it pork stew and made me swallow every bite or face a brutal beating. The putrid, sour smell haunted my dreams, and my body had developed a violent aversion to meat and grease. I covered my mouth as a wave of nausea rose in my throat. My face turned pale, and cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I shook my head violently, pushing the tray away. Seeing this, Arthur's face darkened. He thought I was being difficult, deliberately defying his kindness. He slammed his hand on the table. "Eat it now! Are you trying to starve yourself to death just to spite me? I won't let you die!" His shout made everyone in the cafeteria turn to stare. I panicked, my limbs trembling. He picked up the spoon, scooped up a piece of pork, and shoved it toward my mouth, trying to force me to open it. The smell of the meat right under my nose was the final straw. I couldn't hold it back any longer. I violently pushed his hand away and retched, vomiting right there at the table. Bile and stomach acid spewed onto the floor and his clothes. I heaved until I was empty, my body convulsing in pain. Arthur was frozen in shock. The bowl of stew had shattered on the floor. Leo rushed over and whispered something in his ear, something about the eating disorder the doctor had warned him about. Arthur's expression shifted from anger to horror, then to profound regret. He reached out to help me up, his voice shaking. "Eliza, I didn't know." I brushed his hand away and staggered to my feet, wiping my mouth with my sleeve. I looked at him with bloodshot eyes, filled with exhaustion and despair. "Who are you putting on a show for?" I whispered, my voice as raw as wind through a broken window. "Your kindness is more terrifying than a beating in prison." Then I stumbled away, leaving Arthur standing alone amidst the mess, surrounded by curious stares and the deafening silence of his own conscience. News that I was working for Arthur again spread like wildfire, likely thanks to Isabel or the office gossip mill. It quickly reached Margaret, Arthur's mother. The sharp, formidable woman who had despised me years ago stormed into the company the very next morning. She didn't go to her son's office. She came straight down to the archive, spoiling for a fight. The door was thrown open with violent force. Margaret stood there, clutching a designer handbag, her bejeweled finger pointing straight at my face. Her shrill voice echoed down the hall. "You little witch! You still have the nerve to come back here and latch onto my son. Haven't you ruined him enough? You jailbird, you bad omen. How long are you going to haunt my family?" I was holding a box cutter, slicing tape on a carton of files. At the sound of her voice, my hand paused, but it didn't tremble. I looked up at the woman who had once forced me to scrub floors on my knees, who had once thrown my dinner on the floor for the dog. I used to be terrified of her. Now, I just found her pathetic. Seeing my silence, Margaret grew bolder. She lunged forward, raising her hand to slap me. "Are you mute now? Or are you using that pathetic act to trick my son again? Get the hell out of my sight." Her ringed hand swung toward my face but stopped dead in midair. Her eyes widened in terror, her face drained of color as she stumbled backward, stammering incoherently. I had raised the box cutter. But I hadn't pointed it at her. I had pressed the sharp blade to my own neck, right against the carotid artery pulsing beneath my thin skin. I stared at her, my eyes wide and unblinking, devoid of any emotion, like the eyes of a dead fish. I didn't say a word, just slowly pressed the blade deeper, a thin line of red blood welling up and trickling down my neck onto my white collar. My action was not a threat. It was a demonstration of my complete willingness to end my life at any moment. For someone who was already dead inside, what was there to fear about physical death? You're insane!" Margaret shrieked, her voice shaking with absolute terror. She had never seen anything like it, never witnessed such unhinged desperation. She was afraid not that I would hurt her, but that she would have to witness a suicide, that my blood would stain her reputation and her luxurious life. I took a step toward her, the blade still at my throat, blood still seeping out. Margaret scrambled backward, tripping over her own feet. "No! Stay away from me, you psycho! I'm leaving! I'm leaving now!" She turned and fled, forgetting all her aristocratic composure, her high heels clattering chaotically down the hall. I watched her go, then slowly lowered the blade. I wiped the blood from my neck, the stinging pain a reminder that I was still alive. But why was this life so exhausting, so meaningless? At the end of the year, the company held its annual gala at a 5-star hotel. Arthur forced me to attend, claiming it was mandatory for all employees. That afternoon, a large gift box was delivered to the archive. Inside was a stunning, backless evening gown in a shimmering emerald green, made of soft silk and adorned with sparkling crystals. A short note from Arthur was attached. "Wear this tonight." I looked at the expensive dress, then down at my own rough, calloused hands. The irony was bitter. This dress was meant for a pampered socialite, not a broken ex-convict. But I knew I couldn't defy him. I was a puppet, and he pulled the strings. I took the dress to the cramped staff changing room. I removed my baggy clothes and stood before the mirror, looking at my naked body. I was skeletal, my skin sallow, and my back My back was a horrifying tapestry of scars, crisscrossing, overlapping, raised, and discolored. Some were from the guards' stunned batons, others from beatings with iron rods by fellow inmates. Some were from my own nails during delirious nightmares. They were grotesque centipedes crawling across my skin, a map of my 6 years in hell. Trembling, I put on the dress. The cool silk sliding over my scarred skin made me shudder. The backless design exposed all of my ugliness and ruin. Just as I was fumbling with the side zipper, the door opened. It was Arthur. "Are you ready?" "The car is waiting," he started to say, but the words died in his throat when he saw my back reflected in the large mirror. He froze, his eyes widening in horror, his pupils constricting. He stared, transfixed, at the tangled web of scars, the puckered, purplish flesh. He had never imagined that the body of the wife he had once held could be so mutilated. The raw truth was more brutal than any description in a medical file. "Eliza, you're back," he whispered, his voice ragged and trembling. He took a step forward, his shaking hand reaching out as if to touch the scars, to confirm they were real and not some waking nightmare. The moment his fingers brushed against my skin, it was like an electric shock. The terrifying memories of the beatings flooded back. I let out a piercing scream, shoved his hand away, and scrambled into the corner, wrapping my arms around my head. "Don't hit me! Don't hit me anymore! I gave them the locket. I gave them everything. Please, stop hitting me!" I wailed, my body convulsing, tears streaming down my face. In my mind, it wasn't Arthur standing there. It was the snarling faces of the inmates, the iron rods swinging down. Arthur stood, rooted to the spot, his hands suspended in the empty, cold air. He watched me cowering like a wounded animal begging for its life. His heart felt like it was being squeezed, crushed into 1,000 pieces. What have I done? What kind of hell did I put the woman I loved through? The warm, well-lit changing room suddenly felt colder and more desolate than a tomb. After the breakdown in the changing room, I was still forced to go to the gala. Arthur wouldn't let me leave, afraid of what I might do if left alone. I stood hidden behind a large pillar, the expensive, backless dress now feeling like a shroud wrapped around my ruined body. The glittering chandeliers, the clinking of glasses, the hum of high society chatter, it all made me dizzy and sick. This world wasn't for me. I was a sewer rat dragged into the light, exposed and filthy. Just as I was about to slip away to the restroom, a sharp, feminine voice called out, a voice so familiar it sent a chill down my spine. Well, look who it is. If it isn't Eliza, the woman who pushed me and made me lose my baby all those years ago. I turned. The woman standing before me wore a fiery red dress, her makeup flawless, a diamond necklace sparkling at her throat. It was Vanessa. 6 years had only made her look sharper, more sophisticated. I'd heard she was now married to one of Arthur's major business partners. Vanessa looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my gaunt face and calloused hands before a triumphant smile spread across her face, the smile of a victor looking down on her vanquished foe. I didn't reply and tried to walk away, but she blocked my path, cornering me against a wall. Under the cover of the loud music, she leaned in and whispered, her breath thick with the smell of wine. "What's wrong? Surprised to see me? Or are you just regretting those 6 years you spent in prison for nothing?" I looked up at her, my eyes hollow and empty. This seemed to amuse her even more. She moved closer, her voice dropping to a soft, venomous hiss. "Let me tell you a little secret, Eliza. I was never pregnant. The blood you saw that day? It was just a packet of stage blood I bought at a costume shop and hid in my purse." My ears began to ring. The world went silent, except for Vanessa's mocking laughter echoing in my head. Stage blood? For a cheap packet of fake blood, I had lost 6 years of my life, lost my grandmother, lost my very humanity. I stared at her beautiful face, now twisted with malice. It felt as if a knife had just been plunged into my chest, stealing all the air from my lungs. I didn't attack her. I didn't scream or curse as she might have expected. My mind was flooded with images of solitary confinement, of unjust beatings, of my grandmother's lonely grave. The pain was so immense, it turned inward. I was disgusted with this world of lies, and disgusted with my own stupidity. I stumbled backward, bumping into the bathroom counter. The large mirror reflected my ghostly, pale face. Seeing my strange reaction, Vanessa looked a little unnerved and took a step back. Suddenly, I raised my hands and clawed frantically at my own face, my own neck, as if trying to rip off this tainted skin. Blood welled up under my nails, mixing with my pale makeup. I felt no pain, only a kind of crazed release. "Ah! She's crazy!" Vanessa shrieked before fleeing the restroom. I didn't care. I slammed my head against the mirror in front of me. Crash! The glass shattered. Sharp shards sliced into my forehead. Blood streamed down into my eyes, turning my vision red. The bathroom door was kicked open. Arthur rushed in. He froze at the sight of me, slumped on the floor amidst the water and blood, my face a mess, a shard of glass in my hand, poised to slice my wrist. He lunged forward, ignoring the broken glass crunching under his shoes, and wrapped his arms around me, his voice cracking with terror. "Eliza, stop! What are you doing? Stop it!" I thrashed in his arms, the strength of a madwoman almost overpowering him. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that was not human, but the cry of a mortally wounded animal. "I didn't kill anyone. I didn't push her. Give her back her baby. Just don't lock me in the dark room again. Grandma! Grandma! Save me!" Arthur swept me up into his arms and ran, ignoring the horrified stares of the gala guests. My blood soaked his white shirt, warm and metallic. In my delirium, I clutched at his shirt, my nails digging into his skin, my eyes rolled back in their sockets. Arthur ran and he wept, the tears of a broken man mixing with the blood on my face. And listening to my delirious cries, he began to realize that a terrible truth had been buried for 6 long years. I woke up in a sterile white room that reeked of antiseptic. My wrists and ankles were strapped to the bed to keep me from hurting myself. A doctor stood nearby, shaking his head as he spoke to Arthur. "The patient is suffering from severe depression and acute psychosis. She has extremely high self-harm tendencies. The wounds on her body indicate this isn't the first time." Arthur stood in the corner, his back against the wall, his face haggard and hollowed out after just one night. He looked at me lying unconscious on the bed, then turned to Leo, who had just entered with a file. Leo couldn't meet his eyes. He placed the file on a table, his voice trembling. "Mr. Blackwood, as you instructed, I had someone re-investigate Miss Vanessa's full medical history from 6 years ago. The results are just as you suspected." Arthur snatched the file, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages. The words, the official stamps, the witness statements, they all came together to form a devastating picture of the truth. The doctor who had signed Vanessa's miscarriage certificate was her distant cousin, who had accepted a large sum of money to forge the documents. The ultrasound image was also a fake, taken from another pregnant woman. It had all been a perfectly executed play. There was no baby. There was no crime. There was only an innocent wife, sent to prison by her own husband for 6 years to suffer untold horrors. Arthur dropped the file. The papers scattered across the floor like mournful white butterflies. He staggered backward and collapsed to his knees on the cold, hard floor. "What have I done? Oh God, what have I done?" He clutched his head, his fingers tangling in his disheveled hair. He started to laugh, a wild, broken sound filled with an agony that tore through the quiet hospital room. He had single-handedly destroyed the woman who loved him most in the world, all to protect a venomous snake. My 6 years of youth, my grandmother's life, my dignity, all of it buried by his blind, arrogant stupidity. In the silent hospital room, the only sounds were the steady beep of the heart monitor and the choked sobs of a man being torn apart by his own conscience. Arthur looked at me, his eyes filled with utter despair. He knew that even if he died 1,000 times, he could never wash away this sin, could never give me back the life he had stolen. Arthur didn't immediately expose Vanessa to the law. He decided that prison or death would be too merciful for someone like her. He wanted her to experience the feeling of losing everything, piece by piece, just as she had done to me. A silent, ruthless purge began, orchestrated by a man driven mad by regret. First, he targeted Vanessa's husband's company. Using his power and vast network, he systematically blocked their contracts, cut off their funding, and leaked evidence of tax evasion, pushing the rival firm to the brink of bankruptcy. Vanessa's husband, once a successful entrepreneur, was now drowning in debt. He took his rage out on his wife. Leo told me Vanessa was living a nightmare, beaten by her husband, hounded by creditors, her beauty faded, her glamorous life in ruins. Next, Arthur reviewed his entire company's staff. The cafeteria workers who had taunted me, the security guards who had snickered at my struggles, all were fired on the spot with no severance. He did it all with a brutal efficiency, as if punishing others could quiet the storm raging within him. He also tried to compensate me with material things. He transferred a fortune into my bank account, signed over several properties to my name, and bought me the most expensive supplements and medicines. He flew in the best psychologists from around the world to treat me. He sat by my bedside day and night, feeding me spoonfuls of broth, gently cleaning my hands. But to me, it was all meaningless. I lived like a zombie, going to work out of habit and returning to the mansion to sit by the window, staring into the dark. Money, houses, his belated tenderness, nothing could mend my shattered soul. One afternoon, Arthur entered my room and placed a glittering diamond jewelry box on the table. He knelt beside me, taking my cold, bony hand in his. "Eliza," he said, his voice hoarse, "I've dealt with them. Vanessa is paying the price. Does that make you feel any better?" I slowly turned my head, my empty eyes looking right through him. A faint, bitter smile touched my lips. I pulled my hand away. My voice was as light as a whisper. "Better? Whether she starves to death or gets beaten, will my 6 years come back? Will my grandmother come back to life? Are you getting revenge for me, Arthur, or are you just trying to salvage your own rotten conscience?" My question struck him dumb. He lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. He understood that no matter what he did, the chasm between us, a chasm carved by blood, tears, and a lost life, was too vast to ever be bridged. That night, a sudden storm broke over the city. The rain beat against the mansion's roof tiles with a mournful rhythm. I sat curled up on the windowsill, watching the water streak down the cold glass, my heart a void. Arthur hadn't been home in days. Leo said he was busy handling the fallout at work and orchestrating Vanessa's downfall. I didn't care. He could turn the world upside down for all I cared. It had nothing to do with me anymore. Close to midnight, the roar of a car engine shattered the silence. The gates opened, and Arthur stumbled into the house, soaked to the bone and reeking of alcohol. He didn't turn on the lights, fumbling his way upstairs in the dark. When my door opened, the dim glow of the bedside lamp illuminated his flushed face and bloodshot eyes. He stood there, staring at me, then suddenly collapsed, his knees hitting the wooden floor with a loud thud. The proud, powerful man of the business world was now on his knees before me, a broken wreck. He buried his head, his shoulders shaking with violent, racking sobs. "Eliza, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Hit me, kill me. Just please, stop looking at me like that." I sat motionless. I didn't reach out to help him. I just watched him cry, watched him punch his own chest in self-flagellation. My heart was a block of ice. I felt no satisfaction, no pity. The truth had come too late. It had become meaningless. Arthur looked up, his face a mess of tears. He crawled on his knees toward me, trying to take my hand. I pulled away, my gaze as sharp as a blade. My voice was raspy and devoid of emotion. "What are you crying for? Are you pitying me, or are you crying for your own putrid conscience?" He froze, stammering, "I want to make it up to you. I'll spend the rest of my life atoning for my mistake." I cut him off with a hollow laugh. "Atone? You kill me, then you apologize. So if I stabbed you to death right now, and then I knelt and apologized to you, would you come back to life? Would you forgive me?" My question was a sledgehammer blow that left him speechless. He stared at me, his mouth agape, unable to form a word. He finally understood. This wasn't a marital spat. This was the distance between the living and the dead. Though I was here in flesh and blood, my soul, my love, had died 6 years ago on that fateful day in court. Arthur collapsed onto the floor, his sobs echoing in the vast room, more mournful than the rain lashing against the windows. After that night, Arthur changed. He grew quieter, colder, and more ruthless at work, but around me, he became timid and fearful. He brought home the thick file containing all the evidence of Vanessa's scheme, the confession from the fake doctor, the damning bank records, and threw it on the coffee table in front of his mother. Margaret picked it up, her hands trembling as she read. Her face went from flushed to pale to ghostly white. She couldn't believe the woman she had once adored, the woman she had wanted as her daughter-in-law, was such a venomous snake. More than that, she couldn't believe that her own prejudice and blindness had helped push her son's life into tragedy and my life into hell. The shock was too much. Margaret suddenly clutched her chest, her blood pressure skyrocketing. She collapsed onto the sofa, the side of her face drooping, unable to speak. The ambulance sirens wailed. Arthur called me from the hospital, his voice weary and pleading. "Mom had a stroke. She's in the ICU. Could you come see her? She wants to see you." I wanted to refuse, but the thought of the 5-year contract made me reluctantly agree. I walked into the intensive care unit, the smell of disinfectant heavy in the air. Margaret lay on the bed, hooked up to a tangle of tubes and wires, her face distorted by the stroke. When she saw me, a flicker of belated remorse appeared in her eyes. She tried to move her good arm, reaching for me with a trembling hand, her mouth working to form words that came out as garbled sounds. She wanted to hold my hand, to apologize. I stood at the foot of the bed, watching that frail hand grasping at the air. I once yearned for that hand to comfort me, to hear her call me daughter. But that hand had only ever slapped me, had only ever pointed at my face and cursed me. Now, watching it reach for me, I felt no sympathy, only a rising disgust. I took a step back, out of her reach. My gaze was as cold as if I were looking at a complete stranger. "You should rest," I said, my voice flat and cruel. "Don't strain yourself. No one can understand what you're saying. And even if they could, it wouldn't change anything." Margaret's hand fell limp onto the white sheet. A tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. She understood with agonizing clarity that my indifference was more painful than 1,000 curses. I no longer considered her a mother-in-law. I didn't even consider her worthy of my hate. I turned and walked out, leaving behind the steady hum of the machines and the silent, suffocating regret of a cruel woman. Arthur's transformation, canceling meetings, neglecting wedding preparations, and dedicating all his time to my recovery drove Isabel insane. The pride of a pampered socialite was deeply wounded. She couldn't accept losing to a broken ex-convict like me. Unwilling to confront Arthur directly, she chose the most cowardly path. She came after me. One evening, I left work late. The winter sky had darkened quickly, and the road from the bus stop to the mansion was deserted. As I was walking, a motorcycle with 3 men on it screeched to a halt, blocking my way. They were large, heavily tattooed, and wielding iron pipes. Without a word, they lunged at me like hungry wolves. "Cripple her. Let's see if she can seduce any more men after this." One of them yelled, swinging a pipe hard at my back. A blinding pain shot through me, but I didn't scream or beg for mercy. 6 years in prison, facing far more brutal gang beatings, had taught me one thing. If you don't fight back, you die. Survival instinct kicked in, overpowering my fear. I grabbed a broken brick from the sidewalk, my eyes blazing with a feral bloodshot light. When the second man lunged to grab my hair, I didn't retreat. I charged at him, smashing the brick into his head with all my strength. Crack! He howled in pain, blood gushing from the wound. The other 2 froze, stunned that a frail woman could be so ferocious. I stood there, holding the bloody brick, my body shaking, but my eyes filled with a madness that said I was ready to die and take them with me. "Come on! Who wants to die next?" I screamed, my voice a ragged, wild cry. Just then, Arthur's car screeched to a halt beside us. He and Leo leaped out, horrified by the scene. Arthur saw me clothes torn, face smeared with dirt and blood, but standing defiant like a cornered warrior. Seeing reinforcements, the thugs grabbed their injured friend and fled. Arthur rushed toward me, but I raised the bloody brick, threatening him. "Stay back! Don't touch me!" I shrieked, tears finally streaming down my face. Arthur stopped in his tracks, his face a mask of pain. He realized I was no longer the gentle, submissive Eliza he once knew. Life had turned me into a porcupine, ready to hurt anyone, including myself, to protect the fragile life I had left. It didn't take Arthur long to trace the attack back to Isabel. It was the last straw. He would not tolerate anyone hurting me again, not even his powerful fiancée. The next morning, he called an emergency press conference. In front of hundreds of cameras, he stood at the podium, his face cold and resolute. He announced he was unilaterally breaking off the engagement with Isabel, ready to accept any financial or reputational consequences. "I apologize to Miss Isabel's family for this sudden decision," he declared, his voice firm. "But I have realized my heart can only belong to my ex-wife. I made a terrible mistake in the past. I allowed her to suffer injustice and pain. I will now spend the rest of my life making amends and protecting her from all harm." The announcement sent shockwaves through the city. The media exploded. Some hailed him as a devoted man seeking redemption, others called him a treacherous fool. Arthur didn't care. He was ready to take on the world to protect me. I sat in the cold living room of the mansion, watching him on the television. His words were so beautiful, so moving. The Eliza of 6 years ago would have wept with joy, but the Eliza of today felt nothing. I turned off the TV, plunging the room into silence. In my hands was a tattered old teddy bear, its stuffing poking out. It was the only gift Arthur had ever given me. I had taken it to prison, slept with it on cold nights, used it to wipe away my tears after beatings. Now it was dirty and falling apart, just like our love. I took a needle and thread and began meticulously sewing up its tears. I worked slowly, each stitch through the worn fabric like a stitch through my own heart. I wasn't fixing the bear to keep it. I was mending the broken pieces of my memory so I could finally bury them forever. Arthur could break off his engagement, he could do whatever he wanted, but it wouldn't change the fact that we no longer belonged to the same world. Arthur didn't give up. He stubbornly believed he could rekindle a love that had long since turned to ash. One evening, as the setting sun painted the mansion's walls a bloody red, he brought home an old wooden box. He placed it on the table in front of me with a reverent air. "Eliza, look," he said, his eyes pleading. "I found these in storage at the old house. The cheap silver rings we bought at the street fair in college, the journal you kept when you were 20, and our first photo together from that trip to the coast. I kept all of it." I looked at the box. The silver rings were tarnished, the leather-bound journal was frayed, and the photo showed 2 young, smiling faces, radiant with happiness. These things had once been my world. Now, they were just a bitter mockery, a reminder of my own foolishness. The girl in that photo was dead. Without a word, I picked up the box and walked out to the yard. Arthur followed, thinking I was looking for a quiet place to reminisce. But I walked straight to a pile of dry leaves the gardener had raked, and I lit a match. As the flames leaped up, I tossed the wooden box into the fire. "Eliza, what are you doing?" Arthur screamed, lunging forward, trying to snatch the box back. The fire caught the journal, and it went up in a fierce blaze. He plunged his bare hands into the embers, ignoring the searing heat, trying to pull out the mementos. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, but he seemed to feel no pain. He managed to retrieve the photo, but it was half charred. The girl's face was gone, turned to ash, leaving only his own smiling face stark against the blackened paper. I stood and watched, my face a blank mask. When Arthur cradled his blistered hands and looked at me with tears of accusation, I spoke, my voice cold. "What are you saving? Why are you holding on to that garbage? Stop looking for the old Eliza. She died the day you testified against her in court. The person standing in front of you now is just a corpse named Eliza." My words were a bucket of ice water, extinguishing the last flicker of hope within him. He sank to his knees beside the dying fire, clutching the burnt photograph to his chest, and sobbed like a lost child. With the irrefutable evidence Arthur had collected, Vanessa's day of reckoning finally came. She was indicted on multiple charges: fraud, forgery, and perjury. On the day of her arrest, Arthur drove me past her luxury apartment building. He slowed the car, rolling down the window so I could see. Vanessa was being led out by 2 female officers, Her hands, once adorned with rings, now locked in cold steel handcuffs. Her glamorous facade was gone. Her hair was a mess, her face pale and makeup-free, and she wore a crumpled silk robe. She screamed and struggled, cursing at the onlookers, but it only made her look more pathetic. A crowd had gathered, pointing, filming, their faces filled with the same scorn that had once been directed at me. Arthur looked at me, searching my face for any sign of joy or satisfaction. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "She's paying for what she did. Do you feel any better?" I watched as Vanessa was shoved into the police van, the metal door slamming shut, locking her away in the same dark world I had just escaped. I thought I would be happy, but my heart was just a vast, cold emptiness. This revenge brought me no victory. It was just a belated end to a long, tragic story. I leaned my head against the car window. Happy? Even if she goes to prison, even if she dies, it won't bring back my 6 years. It won't erase the scars on my back. It won't bring my grandmother back for one last meal. Do you think her imprisonment is a gift for me? No, it's just the punishment she deserves. It has nothing to do with my pain. Arthur was silent, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He understood. Justice could be served, but no court could ever heal the wounds of the soul. The car drove on, leaving the commotion behind, carrying 2 people with 2 cold hearts toward an unknown destination. That night, a violent storm hit the city. The wind howled, and lightning tore across the sky, followed by deafening claps of thunder that shook the mansion to its foundations. The storm awakened the monster of fear deep within me. I was on the floor, and with every flash of lightning, I was back in the solitary confinement cell. The blinding light was the guard's flashlight in my eyes. The thunder was the iron door slamming shut, locking me in eternal darkness. "No, don't lock me in. I did nothing wrong. Let me out." I shot up, screaming and thrashing, crashing into furniture. Hearing the commotion, Arthur kicked open the door. He saw me in a full-blown panic attack, eyes rolled back, foam at my mouth. He rushed to hold me. "Eliza, calm down. It's me, Arthur. No one is locking you up. You're home." But I didn't recognize him. In my delirium, he was a cruel prison guard. I fought him, clawing at his face and chest. As he held me tighter, trying to soothe me, I opened my mouth and bit down hard on his shoulder. My teeth sank through his shirt and into his flesh. The taste of blood drove me deeper into madness. Arthur cried out in pain but didn't let go. He gritted his teeth, stroking my hair, whispering useless apologies. I bit him until I was exhausted and finally went limp in his arms. In my semi-conscious state, I wept, murmuring the names of the people I loved. "Grandma, Mom, save me. It hurts so much." I never once said his name. Hearing my pleas, Arthur felt his heart being sliced apart. He realized that in my world, he wasn't a hero or a husband. He was the nightmare. He was the source of all my pain. He held me like that all night, the blood from his wound soaking his shirt, as the storm raged outside. He sat like a statue carved from 1,000 years of regret. The next morning, the storm had passed. I woke up in the soft bed. Arthur was asleep in a chair beside me, a large, dark blood stain on his shoulder. The memory of the night before came rushing back. I looked at his wound, but I felt no pity, only a bone-deep weariness. I knew that if I stayed here, we would both slowly rot in this personal hell. He stirred awake. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough. "Are you hurt anywhere? Should I call the doctor?" I shook my head and sat up. I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze strangely calm. "Arthur," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Let me go." He looked stunned, about to argue, but my empty eyes silenced him. "Why are you keeping me here?" I continued. "To watch me lose my mind every night? To torture yourself? You want to make things right? The only way to do that now is to let me disappear from your life. Don't look for me. Don't contact me. Just consider the old Eliza well and truly dead. Let me go find somewhere quiet to bury what's left of myself." Arthur buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He knew I was right. Keeping me here was selfish, an attempt to soothe his own conscience, not for my happiness. With him, I would always be haunted. Loving someone, He now understood, sometimes meant letting them go. After a long moment, he looked up, his eyes red. He nodded, his voice hoarse. "Okay, I'll let you go." He went to his safe and took out a bank card and a savings passbook. He pressed them into my hand. "But you have to promise me you'll take this. It's not charity, it's the money from the sale of your grandmother's land. Take it, so I know you won't starve to death somewhere. If you don't take it, I won't let you leave." I wanted to throw it away, but his desperate, pleading eyes made me relent. I needed money to get far away. I accepted it as payment for the 6 years of hell he had put me through. "Fine, I'll take it." "Thank you," I said, the words cold and formal, a final end to our tragic bond. For the first time in years, I went into the kitchen and tied on an old apron. I didn't cook a gourmet meal, just a simple, humble dinner like we used to eat in our tiny apartment long ago. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The familiar sounds and smells filled the cold mansion with a strange warmth. When Arthur came home, he froze at the sight of the hot meal on the table. He thought he was dreaming. "Sit down and eat," I said softly, placing a plate in front of him. "I haven't cooked in a long time. I hope it's okay." He sat, his hands trembling as he picked up his fork. He took a bite of chicken, and then another, and then the tears started to fall, splashing onto his plate. He ate ravenously, weeping the whole time, as if it were the most delicious meal he had ever tasted. "It's perfect, Eliza," he choked out. "Just like before. You've forgiven me, haven't you?" I didn't answer. I just watched him eat, knowing I had dissolved a mild sleeping pill into his water glass. "Eat, Arthur," I thought. "Eat well. You'll need your strength for the loneliness that's coming." After he finished, the sedative took effect. He slumped forward, his head resting on the table, a contented smile on his sleeping face. I helped him to bed, tucked him in, and looked at his face one last time. Then I went to my room and packed. I left behind all the expensive clothes and jewelry. In my old canvas bag, I placed a few faded outfits, the mended teddy bear, and the bank card. On the dresser, I left the mansion keys and a note. "Thank you for dinner. We're even now. Goodbye." I slipped out into the night, leaving my entire painful past behind me. When Arthur woke up the next morning, the house was chillingly silent. He ran to my room, calling my name, but it was empty. He found the keys and the note. The final word goodbye was a knife to his heart. He screamed my name, tearing the house apart, but I was gone. This time, I was smarter. I didn't take a bus or a train. I hitched a ride on a long-haul truck heading west, bought a burner phone, and vanished. Arthur searched frantically, hiring the best private investigators, offering his entire fortune as a reward. But it was useless. I had learned how to disappear. The mansion became his tomb. He neglected his company and locked himself in my room, drinking himself into a stupor, surrounded by the faint scent I had left behind. He finally understood the price of his cruelty: eternal loneliness. After 3 days on the road, I arrived in a small, remote town in rural Oregon. The air was clean and cool, the earth a rich, dark brown. I rented a tiny wooden cabin in the middle of a vast forest and started a new life under the name Anne. I worked as a farmhand, my days filled with hard, honest labor. The locals were simple, kind people who didn't know or care about my past. One day, I found a stray dog, wet and shivering. I took him in and named him Freedom. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I slept through the night without nightmares. The pain inside me was still there, a scar that ached on cold days, but it no longer bled. I was learning to live with it. I was slowly, quietly, coming back to life. 2 years passed. Arthur threw himself into his work, making his company more successful than ever, but he was a changed man, cold, somber, and alone. He used his personal fortune to start a foundation that provided free legal aid to the wrongfully convicted, especially women. It was his silent penance. His mother, Margaret, survived her stroke but was left paralyzed and unable to speak. Arthur cared for her, providing the best medical attention, but he never spoke a word to her. His silence was her life sentence, a constant, agonizing reminder of the family she had destroyed. My life in Oregon was peaceful. I thought I had truly escaped, until one day fate intervened. I was at the local farmer's market, selling some wild mushrooms I had foraged. I wore simple, earthy clothes, a scarf covering much of my weathered face. Leo, Arthur's assistant, happened to be in the region on a business trip. He was strolling through the market when he passed me. He glanced over, then stopped. Perhaps it was my posture or the gnarled, scarred hands arranging the mushrooms. He stepped back, squinting. Just then, I looked up. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. My face was darker, lined with sun and time, but the quiet sadness in my eyes was unmistakable. I gasped and quickly pulled the scarf over my face, but it was too late. From a distance, Leo shakily raised his phone and took a picture. The photo crossed the country in an instant. In his New York office, Arthur opened the message, and his world stopped. It was me, older, weathered, but it was me. He caressed my image on the screen, hot tears blurring his vision. He canceled everything and drove, a man possessed, leaving the city behind and heading west. He drove for a day and a night, arriving in my small town at dusk. Leo met him and pointed to a faint light on a distant hill, my cabin. Arthur left his car and walked the rest of the way. He hid behind a large fir tree and watched. I was on my porch, mending a shirt. A neighbor's toddler ran over, calling me Mama Ann, and climbed into my lap. I tickled the child, and she giggled, and then I smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up my entire face. It was the smile he had destroyed 8 years ago, the smile he thought he would never see again. Arthur stood frozen in the dark, his heart aching. He saw my peace, a simple, profound peace that all his money and power could never buy. He realized that I had only been able to truly live again by leaving him. His presence here felt like a desecration. He wanted to run to me, to hold me, to tell me he missed me to the point of madness, but his feet were rooted to the ground. He knew that the moment he appeared, that smile would vanish, replaced by the old, haunted emptiness. To love me now was to leave me alone. He stood there all night, in the cold and the dark. Just before dawn, he knew he had to go. He walked back to his car and retrieved a potted wild orchid he had bought at the market, my favorite flower, one we could never afford back then. He crept to my porch and gently set it down on the steps. He looked at the closed door one last time, his hand rising as if to knock, then falling to his side. "Be well, Eliza," he whispered to the wind, his voice breaking. Then he turned and walked away without looking back, leaving his heart behind in the mountains forever. The morning sun woke me. I opened my door to breathe in the crisp air and saw it. A beautiful wild orchid, its purple blossoms vibrant in the early light. I looked around. The road was empty. But then I saw the footprints in the damp earth, the deep impressions of a man's expensive dress shoes, and by the fir tree I saw a discarded cigarette butt. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who had been here. He had found me. A chill ran down my spine. My first instinct was to run, to pack my bag and disappear again, but I stopped. I looked at the orchid, then at the footprints leading away down the hill. He had come, he had seen me, and he had chosen to leave, to grant me the peace I so desperately needed. He finally understood. He had finally let go. A profound sense of relief washed over me, as if a great weight had been lifted from my soul. I didn't feel anger or fear. I bent down and carefully picked up the orchid. I brought it inside and placed it on the windowsill, where it would get the morning sun. The past was finally, truly, behind me. I would not forgive Arthur. Some wounds can never be fully healed, but I would no longer carry the burden of hatred. I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the clouds drift over the mountains. Life, like this tea, had been bitter at first. But now, finally, there was a lingering sweetness. I smiled, a quiet, peaceful smile. Somewhere far away, Arthur was driving back to his world, and I was staying here, in mine, free.